Chapter 6, in which Magnon and her 2 children are seen. With Gillenormand, sorrow was converted into wrath, he was furious at being in despair. He had all sorts of prejudices and took all sorts of liberties. One of the facts of which his exterior relief and his internal satisfaction was composed was, as we have just hinted, that he had remained a brisk spark, and that he passed energetically for such. This he called having royal renown. This royal renown sometimes drew down upon him singular windfalls. One day, there was brought to him in a basket, as though it had been a basket of oysters, a stout, newly born boy, who was yelling like the deuce, and duly wrapped in swaddling clothes, which a servant maid, dismissed 6 months previously, attributed to him. Gillenormand had, at that time, fully completed his 84th year. Indignation and uproar in the establishment. And whom did that bold hussy think she could persuade to believe that? What audacity! What an abominable calumny! Gillenormand himself was not at all enraged. He gazed at the brat with the amiable smile of a good man who is flattered by the calumny, and said in an aside, "Well, what now? What's the matter? You are finely taken aback, and really, you are excessively ignorant. Le Duc d'Angoulême, the bastard of His Majesty Charles IX, married a silly jade of 15 when he was 85, Virginal, Marquis d'Illuy, brother to the Cardinal de Sourdis, Archbishop of Bordeaux, had, at the age of 83, by the maid of Madame la Présidente Jacqueline, a son, a real child of love, who became a Chevalier of Malta and a Councillor of State. One of the great men of this century, the Abbé Tabaraud, is the son of a man of 87. There is nothing out of the ordinary in these things. And then, the Bible. Upon that I declare that this little gentleman is none of mine. Let him be taken care of. It is not his fault. This manner of procedure was good-tempered. The woman, whose name was Magnon, sent him another parcel in the following year. It was a boy again. Thereupon, Gillenormand capitulated. He sent the 2 brats back to their mother, promising to pay 80 francs a month for their maintenance, on the condition that the said mother would not do so any more. He added, "I insist upon it that the mother shall treat them well. I shall go to see them from time to time." And this he did. He had had a brother who was a priest, and who had been rector of the Academy of Poitiers for 33 years, and had died at 79. "I lost him young," said he. This brother, of whom but little memory remains, was a peaceable miser, who, being a priest, thought himself bound to bestow alms on the poor whom he met, but he never gave them anything except bad or demonetized sous, thereby discovering a means of going to hell by way of paradise. As for Gillenormand the elder, he never haggled over his almsgiving, but gave gladly and nobly. He was kindly, abrupt, charitable, and if he had been rich, his turn of mind would have been magnificent. He desired that all which concerned him should be done in a grand manner, even his rogueries. One day, having been cheated by a businessman in a matter of inheritance, in a gross and apparent manner, he uttered this solemn exclamation, "That was indecently done. I am really ashamed of this pilfering. Everything has degenerated in this century, even the rascals. Morbleu! This is not the way to rob a man of my standing. I am robbed as though in a forest, but badly robbed. Sylvie sint consul digni." He had had 2 wives, as we have already mentioned. By the first he had had a daughter, who had remained unmarried, and by the second another daughter, who had died at about the age of 30, who had wedded, through love, or chance, or otherwise, a soldier of fortune who had served in the armies of the Republic and of the Empire, who had won the cross at Austerlitz and had been made colonel at Waterloo. "He is the disgrace of my family," said the old bourgeois. He took an immense amount of snuff, and had a particularly graceful manner of plucking at his lace ruffle with the back of one hand. He believed very little in God. Chapter 7 Rule, receive no one except in the evening. Such was M. Luc Esprit Gillenormand, who had not lost his hair, which was grey rather than white, and which was always dressed in dog's ears. To sum up, he was venerable in spite of all this. He had something of the 18th century about him, frivolous and great. In 1814 and during the early years of the Restoration, M. Gillenormand, who was still young, he was only 74, lived in the Faubourg Saint-Germain, Rue Servandoni, near Saint-Sulpice. He had only retired to the Marais when he quitted society, long after attaining the age of 80. And, on abandoning society, he had immured himself in his habits. The principal one, and that which was invariable, was to keep his door absolutely closed during the day, and never to receive anyone whatever except in the evening. He dined at 5 o'clock, and after that his door was open. That had been the fashion of his century, and he would not swerve from it. The day is vulgar, said he, and deserves only a closed shutter. Fashionable people only light up their minds when the zenith lights up its stars. And he barricaded himself against every one, even had it been the king himself. This was the antiquated elegance of his day. Chapter 8 Do not make a pair. We have just spoken of M. Gillenormand's two daughters. They had come into the world 10 years apart. In their youth they had borne very little resemblance to each other, either in character or countenance, and had also been as little like sisters to each other as possible. The youngest had a charming soul, which turned towards all that belongs to the light, was occupied with flowers, with verses, with music, which fluttered away into glorious space, enthusiastic, ethereal, and was wedded from her very youth, in ideal, to a vague and heroic figure. The elder had also her chimera, she espied in the azure some very wealthy purveyor, a contractor, a splendidly stupid husband, a million-made man, or even a prefect, the receptions of the prefecture, an usher in the antechamber with a chain on his neck, official balls, the harangues of the town hall, to be Madame la Préfète, all this had created a whirlwind in her imagination. Thus the two sisters strayed, each in her own dream, at the epoch when they were young girls. Both had wings, the one like an angel, the other like a goose. No ambition is ever fully realized, here below at least. No paradise becomes terrestrial in our day. The younger wedded the man of her dreams, but she died. The elder did not marry at all. At the moment when she makes her entrance into this history which we are relating, she was an antique virtue, an incombustible prude, with one of the sharpest noses, and one of the most obtuse minds that it is possible to see. A characteristic detail, outside of her immediate family, no one had ever known her first name. She was called Mademoiselle Gillenormand, the elder. In the matter of cant, Mademoiselle Gillenormand could have given points to a miss. Her modesty was carried to the other extreme of blackness. She cherished a frightful memory of her life. One day, a man had beheld her garter. Age had only served to accentuate this pitiless modesty. Her gamp was never sufficiently opaque, and never ascended sufficiently high. She multiplied clasps and pins where no one would have dreamed of looking. The peculiarity of prudery is to place all the more sentinels in proportion as the fortress is the less menaced. Nevertheless, let him who can explain these antique mysteries of innocence, she allowed an officer of the Lancers, her grand-nephew, named Theodule, to embrace her without displeasure. In spite of this favored Lancer, the label, prude, under which we have classed her, suited her to absolute perfection. Mademoiselle Gillenormand was a sort of twilight soul. Prudery is a demi-virtue and a demi-vice. To prudery she added bigotry, a well-assorted lining. She belonged to the Society of the Virgin, wore a white veil on certain festivals, mumbled special orisons, revered the Holy Blood, venerated the Sacred Heart, remained for hours in contemplation before a Rococo Jesuit altar in a chapel which was inaccessible to the rank and file of the faithful, and there allowed her soul to soar among little clouds of marble, and through great rays of gilded wood. She had a chapel friend, an ancient virgin like herself, named Mademoiselle Vaubois, who was a positive blockhead, and beside whom Mademoiselle Gillenormand had the pleasure of being an eagle. Beyond the Agnus Dei and Ave Maria, Mademoiselle Vaubois had no knowledge of anything except of the different ways of making preserves. Mademoiselle Vaubois, perfect in her style, was the ermine of stupidity without a single spot of intelligence. Let us say it plainly, Mademoiselle Gillenormand had gained rather than lost as she grew older. This is the case with passive natures. She had never been malicious, which is relative kindness, and then, years wear away the angles, and the softening which comes with time had come to her. She was melancholy with an obscure sadness of which she did not herself know the secret. There breathed from her whole person the stupor of a life that was finished, and which had never had a beginning. She kept house for her father. Gillenormand had his daughter near him, as we have seen that Monseigneur Bienvenu had his sister with him. These households comprised of an old man and an old spinster are not rare, and always have the touching aspect of two weaknesses leaning on each other for support. There was also in this house, between this elderly spinster and this old man, a child, a little boy, who was always trembling and mute in the presence of Gillenormand. Gillenormand never addressed this child except in a severe voice, and sometimes, with uplifted cane, "Here, sir, rascal, scoundrel, come here. Answer me, you scamp. Just let me see you, you good for nothing." Etc., etc. He idolized him. This was his grandson. We shall meet with this child again later on.